Hey guys, this is Tyler from Motion Array, and today I want to talk about 10 things that I wish I would have known about After Effects when I first started about 13 years ago. Now, a lot of you will know some of these tricks, but hopefully there's one in here that you don't know, and it will save you a lot of time. So let's go ahead and get started. So coming in at number 1 is sequencing layers. So here I am in After Effects, and let's say I have a ton of images here that I want to reveal one after another. Instead of doing this manually, I'm just going to trim up my layers to about 5 seconds. Next, I'm going to come down to the last one and click on it. Then I'm going to come to the top, and holding Shift, I'm going to select the first layer. So now I have selected all of my layers, and I'm going to come up to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, and then I'm going to come down to Sequence Layers. If you don't want them to overlap, you can just click OK, but let's say I want them to overlap for 1 second, and I want them to dissolve or fade in to the next one after another. So I'm just going to click OK, and now we can see that all of our layers are perfectly timed out, fading in to the next. So this is a pretty cool feature that I didn't know about until recently, and I cannot believe it. All right, so the second tip I would like to show you is how to set your keyframe interpolation to linear by default. Now, what is keyframe interpolation? So here I have a shape layer, and I'm just going to set a few position keyframes. And by default, After Effects turns the keyframe interpolation to auto Bezier. So if I highlight my keyframes and I right click and come down to keyframe interpolation, it's set to auto Bezier. Now this can be a real pain, having to come to your keyframes and right click and come down to keyframe interpolation and then changing this to linear. So I want to show you how to change that. So up here under After Effects, Preferences and General, you will see default spatial interpolation to linear right here. And all you have to do is check that and click OK. So now if I remove all of these keyframes and set some new ones, we will see that our default spatial interpolation is set to linear. For the third tip, what I would like to show you is how to easily crop compositions. So here I have some text, and let's say I wanted to crop this to be the exact size of this text. Now you could come up to composition settings, and come over here to the width and height and just mess around with this until you get it right. Or you can click on this little button right here that says Region of Interest. Once you click on that, you can simply drag a box around the area that you would like to crop. And then you can come up here to Composition, Crop Comp to Region of Interest. And there you go. Easily cropping in After Effects. Tip number 4 is adjusting multiple keyframes at the same time. So here I have this simple little animation of this circle scaling up, moving around, and scaling down. Now, let's say I want all of this to happen a lot faster. When I first started, I would have adjusted all of these keyframes individually, but there's a much easier way. So I'm just going to highlight all of my keyframes, and holding Alt, I'm going to click on the last keyframe, and I'm simply going to drag it over, and it's going to compress all of these keyframes into a shorter amount of time. Or if you want, you can lengthen your keyframes as well. So now we've adjusted all of the keyframes without having to adjust them one by one. For tip number 5, I want to show you how locking panels can speed up your workflow. So In this composition, I have a pre-comp with a photo of this guy here, and I have a circular mask. So let's say I actually want to adjust this image and maybe scale it up a little bit and center it inside of this circle. Now, I could come into this comp and just guess about how it needs to be, or I can lock this panel here and now double click on my pre-comp and drag this panel over to the right and open up both compositions at the same time. So now when I make adjustments inside of here, I can see how they're going to look in my final composition. So if I scale him up, drag him over to the center, you can see that it's being updated dynamically. And this is a pretty useful trick here. For tip number 6, I would like to talk about preserving the underlying transparency. Now, what is that? So here I have some text, and let's say I want to have this texture here overlay the text. So typically what I would do is duplicate my text layer and set a track matte like this, and then, change this to screen. Now we can avoid all of that. So what I'm going to do is duplicate that out, and I'm going to just drop my texture on top and scale it down a little bit. And next, I'm just going to click on this button right here. So this T right here is for preserve underlying transparency. And when I click on that, you will see that our texture is automatically cut out to the alpha channel of the layer below. So now I can just change this to screen, and there you go. My texture is being cut out by the text underneath using preserve underlying transparency. Tip number 7 is to learn the keyboard shortcuts. Now, I've learned a lot of keyboard shortcuts over the years, but if I would have sat down and learned them from the beginning, I would have saved a lot of time and a lot of my life. So I just want to show you 2 keyboard shortcuts that I recently learned that hopefully you don't know about, and hopefully will save you a lot of time. So here I have a circle, and you'll notice that the anchor point is not in the center of the shape. So there's an easy way to set that anchor point to the center of the shape. So I'm just going to highlight this layer, and I'm going to hold Command, and I'm going to double click on the Pan Behind tool. And when I do that, the anchor point snaps to the center of the layer. Now this also works with text layers, so let me just make a text layer. And let me turn this shape layer off. And I'm going to hold Command and double click the Pan Behind tool, and the anchor point snaps to the center of the layer. Now the next keyboard shortcut I would like to show you is how to easily trim a layer. So here I have a shape layer that lasts the entire duration of this composition, and let's say I just want it to last from 1 second to 2 seconds. So what I'm going to do is come to the 1 second mark, and with my layer highlighted, I'm going to press Alt and the in brackets, and then I'm going to come to 2 seconds, and I'm going to hold Alt and press the out bracket. And what that will do is trim up the layer to exactly where I want it. The next tip is a pretty basic one, but helpful nonetheless. So when I first started After Effects, I wanted to use cameras in my composition. And every time I started to animate the position, crazy things would happen because you have to animate both the position and the point of interest at the same time. So for this tip, it's just basically to parent your camera to a null for easier animation. So I'm just going to come up here, create a new null object, make it 3D, and I'm going to parent my camera to it and do all of the animation on this null. So now I can animate my camera through this scene quickly and easily. And I know what some of you are going to say. After Effects now has a one node camera that does the exact same thing. And this is true, but when I started, that was not an option. And by default, the two node camera is selected in After Effects. So I thought I would just throw this tip in there. Maybe it helps some of you, maybe it doesn't. Hopefully it does. For tip number 9, I would like to show you some kerning tricks that I picked up over the years. So here is a sentence, and the kerning does not look that good because by default, After Effects sets the auto kerning to metrics. And simply by changing this from metrics to optical, it does a much better job of kerning our type. Now, if you would like to come in and adjust the kerning even more, all you have to do is click here on your type layer, and holding Alt, you can click on the left and right arrow keys to kern in between individual letters, like so. Now, this doesn't look very good, but I think you get the idea. All right, so one more tip I would like to show you is basically how to set the auto kerning to optical by default. So I'm just going to come up here and come to After Effects Preferences and General. Then I'm going to come down here where it says Reveal Preferences in Finder. And next I'm going to come up here to this Preferences text document, and I'm going to double click on that, and that's going to open up this text document, and right here it says auto kerning type, metrics auto kerning, and I'm just going to change this to optical. Is that spelled right? No. Optical. And now I'm going to save it, and from now on, whenever I open After Effects, it will automatically open it to optical by default. So tip number 10 is not that exciting, but it's definitely advice that I wish I would have gotten when I first started out. And that is to use scripts. Now, if you're not familiar with scripts, we have a blog post on the site that tells you what they are and how to install them, etc. But, you know, one of my favorite scripts is the reposition anchor point, and it just allows you to quickly and easily move the anchor point on a layer to the center, to the top, to the bottom left, etc., etc. You get the idea. So do yourself a favor and head on over to aescripts.com and browse around and take a look at all of the useful scripts people have written that will definitely speed up your After Effects workflow. So there you have it. These are 10 tips that I wish I would have known when I first started with After Effects. Hopefully you found them useful, and thank you so much for watching.